we often picture Marie Antoinette in the height of her splendor. But what if the woman history remembers as a symbol of arrogant excess was actually just a frightened teenager trying to survive a world where privacy was a crime and every gesture was a political act? We see the towering wigs dusted with flour. We see the wide pannier skirts that claimed entire hallways. We hear the misquoted line about letting them eat cake. But before the scandal, before the diamond necklaces and the revolution, there was simply a girl. She was a child who loved dogs and sliding down banisters, thrust into a game she did not know how to play. Imagine the scent of heavily powdered wigs and the rustle of stiff silk echoing through the hall of mirrors, a world of dazzling beauty that concealed a deadly rigidity. The air is thick with the perfume of 10,000 courtiers, masking the underlying scent of unwashed bodies and ancient stone. Here, a smile could make a career, and a frowned brow could destroy a lineage. It is a place of golden cages and velvet ropes. If you are joining us for the first time or returning to the court, please do subscribe to help our community grow. And I'd love to know in the comments where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what is the hour on your clock. Settle into your pillows now. Let the tension of your own day fade as we travel back to the twilight of the French monarchy. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we open the heavy velvet curtains to reveal the marble halls of Vienna, where a young archduchess is about to have her destiny rewritten. Our story begins not in the lush greenery of Versailles, but in the colder, sharper air of Austria. It is November 2nd, in the year 1755. In the Grand Hofburg Palace, Empress Maria Theresa is in labor. She is the most powerful woman in Europe, a matriarch of formidable will who rules a vast empire. This child will be her 15th. The birth is difficult, but the Empress is strong. Yet, outside the palace walls, the world is trembling. On this very day, hundreds of miles away, a catastrophic earthquake is tearing the city of Lisbon apart. Thousands are perishing in fires and tidal waves. As the newborn cry echoes through the Viennese chambers, the astrologers and courtiers whisper. They see the coincidence of the birth and the disaster as a dark omen. They fear this child is born under a shadow. But inside the nursery, there is only the warmth of family. They name her Maria Antonia. To the world, she is an archduchess of Austria, but to her family, she is simply Antonia. Her early life is surprisingly simple for a daughter of the Caesars. The Austrian court, though grand, possesses a certain domestic warmth that is entirely absent in France. The imperial family lives with a degree of intimacy. They are not merely symbols of state, but a mother, a father, and a chaotic brood of children. Antonia grows up under the loving but strict gaze of her mother. Her father, Emperor Francis I, is a gentle soul who dotes on his daughters. The winters are long and cold in Vienna. The wind howls through the stone corridors of the Hofburg, but Antonia finds joy in the simple pleasures of the season. She loves the sound of sleigh bells ringing out in the crisp air during rides through the snowy countryside. She loves the warmth of the porcelain stoves in the palace rooms. In the summers, the family moves to Schönbrunn Palace. This is a place of golden ochre walls and expansive gardens. Here, the etiquette is relaxed. The little archduchess runs through the halls. She is a tomboy at heart. She is known to slide down the polished banisters with her brothers and sisters, her laughter echoing off the high ceilings. It is a childhood marked by a lack of pretension. One famous afternoon, a young prodigy comes to play music for the Empress. His name is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He is only 6 years old, roughly the same age as Antonia. As the story goes, the young musician slips on the highly polished floor. While the other royals might have stood by, Antonia rushes to help him up. Charmed by her kindness, the little Mozart looks her in the eye and declares that he will marry her when they grow up. The court laughs at the innocent proposal. It is a sweet moment, a snapshot of a normal childhood that Antonia would soon lose forever. However, despite her high rank, Antonia's education is woefully neglected. Her governesses are indulgent. They do little to discipline her mind. She learns to dance, for she has a natural grace. She learns to play the harp and the harpsichord, taught by the famous composer Christoph Willibald Gluck. She has a talent for music, a trait she will carry all her life. But when it comes to the hard skills of reading and writing, she struggles. At the age of 12, her handwriting is a messy scrawl. She can barely write a coherent sentence in German, let alone French. She is flighty, easily distracted, and prefers playing with her dogs to studying history. She is a pawn who is not yet ready for the board. For years, the Empress Maria Theresa has been playing a long game of chess with Europe. Her goal is to cement an alliance with her old enemy, France. She dreams of uniting the Habsburgs and the Bourbons to create a superpower that will dominate the continent. But for a long time, Antonia is not the chosen piece. She is the 15th child, far down the line of succession. She is free to be a child because she is not essential. But fate is cruel. Smallpox sweeps through the imperial family. It takes some of Antonia's sisters and leaves another, scarred and unfit for a royal marriage. Suddenly, the focus shifts. The board is rearranged. Antonia is the only one left who fits the requirements. She is young, she is healthy, and she is available. The deal is struck. The marriage alliance is finalized. The centuries of blood and war between Austria and France will be healed by the marriage of this teenage girl to the future king of France. The transformation begins immediately. The carefree days of sliding down banisters are over. The tutors arrive. They are stern and demanding. They must turn this German-speaking tomboy into a polished French princess in a matter of months. Actors are hired to teach her diction. Dance masters teach her the specific, gliding walk required at Versailles. But the scrutiny goes deeper than just lessons. The French court is obsessed with appearance. An envoy from France arrives to inspect the merchandise. He looks at her teeth. He finds them crooked and uneven. This is unacceptable for a queen of France. And so, the painful physical molding begins. A dentist is brought in. Without anesthesia, he uses wires and pressure to force her teeth into a perfect alignment. It is a slow, aching process. It lasts for months. She endures the pain because she is told it is her duty. She is strapped into stiff corrective corsets to reshape her waist and posture. She is no longer Antonia. She is a project. She is a vessel for peace. Her mother, the Empress, loves her, but she loves the empire more. She writes long letters to Antonia, drilling into her the importance of this role. She tells her that the fate of Europe rests on her small shoulders. The day of departure finally arrives. It is April 1770. Antonia is 14 years old. She sits in a carriage, looking back at the Hofburg Palace through a veil of tears. She is leaving everything she has ever known. She is leaving her mother, her sisters, and the safe, warm chaos of her childhood. As the carriage wheels rumble over the cobblestones, leaving Vienna behind, she does not know if she will ever return. The air is cold, but the tears on her cheeks are hot. She travels toward the setting sun, toward a country she has never seen, to marry a boy she has never met. The journey is a spectacle of exhaustion. It is a massive, moving city on wheels. The cavalcade consists of 57 carriages. There are 376 horses, their breath steaming in the cool spring air. The procession stretches for miles. It moves at a snail's pace. The roads are rutted and muddy. Dust rises in choking clouds when the sun shines, and mud splatters the velvet curtains when it rains. For 2.5 weeks, the rhythm of Antonia's life is the swaying of the coach and the thunder of hooves. They pass through the towns of Bavaria and the principalities of the Rhine. Crowds gather to see the daughter of the Empress. They cheer and wave, but inside the carriage, Antonia is gripped by anxiety. She clutches her little pug dog, Mops. The dog is her last connection to home, a source of unconditional love in a world of transactional marriages. Finally, they reach the border. The Rhine River separates the German lands from France. In the middle of the river lies a small strip of land. It is called the Isle of Pheasants. It is neutral ground, neither French nor Austrian. Here, a special pavilion has been constructed for the handover. It is a wooden structure built just for this single day. It is meant to symbolize the transition. Antonia steps out of her carriage. Her legs are stiff from the journey. She looks at the pavilion. Inside, the rooms are divided by a strict line. One side is furnished in the Austrian style, the other in the French style. She enters the Austrian side. The air inside is still and smells of fresh timber and varnish. She looks at the tapestries hanging on the walls. They were chosen by local officials who did not think about the subject matter. They depict the story of Jason and Medea. It is a violent, tragic myth. In the tapestry, Medea is murdering her own children. The young Gerda, who would visit the pavilion later, was horrified. He wondered how they could display such a gruesome omen at a wedding celebration. Antonia, young and frightened, likely barely notices. She is too focused on the ordeal to come. The ritual of the remus, or handover, is absolute. The French court insists that a queen of France must retain nothing of a foreign court. Antonia steps into a cozy little tent inside the pavilion, where her Austrian attendants, who've been with her since she was a kid, are all teary-eyed as they help her get ready for the ceremony. They gently peel off her travel clothes, swapping her Austrian outfit for fresh French attire, making her shiver in the cool river air. All her Austrian belongings, clothes, jewelry, even ribbons, are taken away as part of a tradition marking a new beginning. It's a tough moment for her, filled with mixed emotions. Then, the French ladies step forward. They bring the new wardrobe. The scent of heavy French perfume fills the small space, masking the smell of the river. They dress her in the finest French satin. They lace her into a bodice that is cut differently, tighter and lower than what she is used to. They put red-heeled shoes on her feet. They powder her hair. But the hardest moment is yet to come. They tell her that her dog, Mops, cannot come with her. A French queen does not have an Austrian dog. Antonia begs, she cries, but the rules of etiquette are iron. The dog is taken from her arms. As she watches Mops being carried back toward the Austrian carriages, she realizes the true cost of her crown. She is completely alone. The The doors open. She steps across the line into the French side of the pavilion. She is no longer Maria Antonia. She is Marie Antoinette. She is presented to her new family. King Louis XV is there. He is an old man, weary and cynical, but he has an eye for beauty. He looks at the young girl. He sees her fresh complexion, her blue eyes, her trembling lip. He declares her delightful. This is the first test passed. But then she meets her husband. The Dauphin, the future Louis XVI, is 15 years old. He is a stark contrast to the graceful girl before him. He is awkward and sullen. He is a large boy, heavy-set and nearsighted. He shuffles his feet. He does not know what to say to a girl. He prefers the solitude of the woods to the conversation of a court. He looks at her without a spark of interest. Marie Antoinette curtsies low, her French silks rustling. She smiles the smile she has been practicing, but inside her heart sinks. This is the stranger she must spend her life with. She climbs into a French carriage. The door closes. The wheels turn. She is moving toward Paris, toward Versailles, toward the center of the world. If the journey was exhausting, the arrival at Versailles is a collision with a new reality. The Palace of Versailles is not just a home, it is a city. It houses nearly 10,000 people. It is a labyrinth of gold and mirrors, stretching out as far as the eye can see. As she enters the courtyard, the noise is deafening. The clattering of hooves, the shouting of guards, the clicking of thousands of heels on the cobblestones. But what strikes her first is the smell. Beneath the layers of musk and floral perfume, Versailles reeks. The plumbing is non-existent. The sheer number of people packed into the palace creates a stench that hangs in the air like a fog. The hallways are drafty and cold, yet the rooms are stiflingly hot, lit by thousands of beeswax candles that consume the oxygen. Marie Antoinette is thrust into the theater of etiquette. In Vienna, rules existed, but they made sense. In Versailles, the rules are a religion, and they are absurd. Every moment of her life is now a public performance. Her day begins with the lever, the rising ceremony. She wakes up in a bed surrounded by heavy brocade curtains. But she cannot simply get up. She must wait. The doors open, and a crowd of people enters her bedroom. These are not just servants. They are duchesses, princesses, and courtiers. They are there to watch her get dressed. One famous morning, the absurdity of this ritual reaches its peak. Marie Antoinette stands naked, shivering in the cold morning air. She wraps her arms around herself for warmth. Her chemise, her undershirt, is ready to be handed to her. The rule states that the chemise must be handed to her by the highest ranking woman present. The lady-in-waiting picks up the chemise, but just then, a duchess enters the room. The lady-in-waiting must stop. She cannot hand the shirt. She is outranked. She passes the garment to the duchess. But before the duchess can hand it to the shivering Dauphine, a princess of the blood enters. Everything stops again. The duchess must curtsy and hand the shirt to the princess. All the while, Marie Antoinette stands there, teeth chattering, waiting for the women to finish their game of rank. When she finally gets the shirt, she whispers, "This is ridiculous." It is her first rebellion. She learns that privacy is considered a crime. To be alone is to be suspicious. She is watched when she eats. This is the service à la Francaise. The king and queen and their family dine in public. Crowds of well-dressed Parisians file past the table to gawk at them as they chew. The food is brought from kitchens far away. By the time it reaches the table, the soup is cold and covered in a layer of grease. Marie Antoinette picks at her food. She can feel the eyes on her, hundreds of them, tracking her fork, judging her appetite, analyzing her sip of water. She must learn the Versailles glide. The heels of her shoes are high, and her skirts are heavy and wide. If she walks normally, she will bounce, and her headdress will wobble. So she must slide her feet along the floor, keeping her upper body perfectly still, like a swan gliding on a lake. It requires immense core strength and concentration. Looming over her is the Comtesse de Noailles, the head of her household. Marie Antoinette nicknames her Madame Etiquette. The Comtesse is a woman of rigid tradition. She corrects Marie's every move. A Dauphine does not laugh like that. She scolds. A Dauphine does not run. A Dauphine does not slump. Marie feels the walls closing in. She is a bird in a gilded cage. She tries to do what her mother told her. She writes letters home, but the letters from Empress Maria Theresa are not comforting. They are critical. The Empress has spies in Versailles. She knows everything Marie does. Your handwriting is getting worse, the Empress writes. You are not trying hard enough to please the king. You must read more. The pressure is relentless. The Empress reminds her constantly of the one job she has, to produce an heir. But this is the one thing Marie Antoinette cannot do, and it is the source of her deepest shame. Her marriage to Louis is a source of confusion and pain. The Dauphin is not cruel, but he is painfully shy and physically awkward. He has no interest in the bedroom. His passions lie elsewhere. He loves locks. He has a private forge installed in the palace, a room that smells of iron and fire. He spends hours there, making keys and fixing mechanisms. He comes to dinner with soot on his hands. He also loves to hunt. He tracks stags through the forests of Versailles until he is exhausted. Then he eats a massive meal and falls asleep instantly. Marie Antoinette waits. Days turn into months. Months turn into years. The marriage remains unconsummated. For a royal couple, the bed is a political battlefield, and they are losing. The court begins to whisper. Why is there no pregnancy? Is something wrong with him? Is something wrong with her? The whispers turn into mockery. Pamphlets appear in Paris. They are cruel and graphic. They make fun of the king's inability to perform. They depict Marie Antoinette as frustrated and barren. The humiliation is public and constant. She is a teenager, confused about her own body, married to a boy who won't touch her, and the entire nation is discussing their sex life. Even their celebrations turn to tragedy. During the wedding festivities in Paris, a grand fireworks display is planned. The crowds are massive. Thousands of people pack the square. But something goes wrong. A rocket misfires. Panic spreads. The crowd surges. In the stampede, hundreds of people are crushed to death. The bodies line the streets. Marie Antoinette and Louis are horrified. They empty their personal purses to help the families of the victims. But the shadow hangs over them. The people of Paris whisper that this marriage is cursed. First the earthquake, now the massacre. Isolated and lonely, Marie Antoinette seeks escape. If she cannot be a wife, she will find other ways to feel alive. She finds solace in friendship. She gravitates towards women who are sensitive and affectionate, like the Princess de Lamballe. They hold hands, they weep together. They create a bubble of emotional intimacy that the court lacks. She also discovers the thrill of disguise. Paris has a tradition of masked balls at the opera. Here, beneath a velvet domino mask, a queen can be anonymous. She sneaks out of the palace. She travels to Paris in a nondescript carriage. Entering the opera ball, she is intoxicated by the freedom. For a few hours, she is just a woman in a mask. She can flirt, she can laugh, she can dance without the Versailles glide. It is a dangerous game, but the adrenaline makes her feel alive. Then, in May 1774, the bell tolls. King Louis XV falls ill. It is smallpox, the same disease that scarred Marie's childhood. The king's face turns purple and swollen. The stench of the dying monarch fills the royal apartments. The courtiers flee, afraid of infection. On May 10th, a candle is extinguished in the window of the king's chamber. It is the signal. A thunderous noise erupts in the palace. It sounds like a storm approaching. It is the sound of hundreds of courtiers running down the hallway. They are running to the apartments of the Dauphin to hail the new power. Marie Antoinette and Louis are in their private rooms when the doors burst open. The crowd bows low. The king is dead. Long live the king. The weight of the crown falls upon them. They are not ready. Louis is 19. Marie is 18. They are children playing dress-up. Overwhelmed by the moment, they instinctively kneel on the floor. They clasp their hands together and weep. Their prayer echoes through history. O God, guide us and protect us. We are too young to reign. They are the king and queen of France. But they are strangers to their people and strangers to each other. To apologize for the burden he has placed on her, or perhaps to give her a place to be away from him, Louis gives his wife a gift. It is a small palace on the grounds of Versailles called the Petit Trianon. It is a jewel box of a house surrounded by gardens. He hands her a key. It is a key made of diamonds. You love flowers, the king says awkwardly. Well, I have a bouquet to give you, the little Trianon. Marie Antoinette takes the key. In her hand, it feels like the key to a prison cell, or perhaps the key to an escape. She decides then and there, if she cannot command the king, she will command this house. She will create a world where she makes the rules, a world where modern etiquette is forbidden. With the crown now upon her head and a private retreat at her disposal, Marie Antoinette decided that if she could not be a wife or mother, she would be something else entirely. She would be the queen of fashion. Before we explore the dizzying heights of her reign, the towering hairstyles, and the scandalous diamond necklace affair, I'd love to hear from you. Are there other historical figures whose private lives you wish to explore in this depth? Perhaps the hidden world of an emperor of Rome, or the secrets of a queen of Egypt. Leave your suggestions in the comments, and I may just weave their tale next. The silence of the gilded cage eventually became deafening. Marie Antoinette, now the Queen of France, found herself atop a lonely summit. The awkward teenager had vanished. In her place stood a woman who had realized a singular, dangerous truth. If she could not command the politics of the nation, and if she could not yet command the heart of her husband, she would command the eyes of the world. The era of the Austrian child was over. The era of the queen of fashion had begun. This transformation did not happen in isolation. It required a partner. Enter Rose Burton. In the rigid hierarchy of Versailles, Rose was a nobody. She was a commoner. She was a milliner from the streets of Paris. By all laws of etiquette, she should never have been allowed past the servants' entrance. But Marie Antoinette was done with etiquette. She saw in Rose a kindred spirit, a woman of vision and daring. The queen did the unthinkable. She invited Rose Burton into her private apartments. This was a scandal. Duchesses were left waiting in the antechamber, while a dressmaker sat with the queen, discussing silk and ribbons. Together, they did not just make clothes, they invented haute couture. They turned fashion into a weapon of mass distraction. The most famous creation born from this partnership was the pouf. To call it a hairstyle is a severe understatement. It was architecture. It was a statement. It was a madness. The queen's hair was teased, oiled, and pulled up over a wire cage. It rose higher and higher, 1 foot, 2 feet, sometimes 3 feet above her head. To support this towering structure, a paste was used. It was a heavy, sticky pomade, made from beef marrow and bear grease. The smell was potent, often masked by clouds of scented powder. But the hair was just the canvas. Into these towering wigs, Rose Burton and the Queen inserted entire worlds. They placed ostrich feathers that scraped the tops of door frames. They wove in pearls and ribbons, but they went further. The pouf became a way to comment on current events. When the French Navy won a battle, the Queen wore a wig that held a model of a ship, complete with sails and rigging, sailing on a sea of her own hair. It was marvelous. It was absurd. It was the talk of Europe. Yet there was a dark irony hidden in the powder. To keep these wigs white, pounds of flour were used. At the very moment the Queen was dusting her hair with the finest grain, the people of France were rioting in the streets because bread was too expensive. The flour war raged outside the palace gates. Men and women were fighting for a loaf of bread. Inside, the Queen was turning that same flour into a fashion statement. She was not cruel. She was simply blinded by the walls of Versailles. She did not see the hunger. She only saw the mirror. The spending accelerated. It became a hunger of its own. The Queen bought nearly 300 dresses a year. There was the grand habit de cour, the stiff, formal court dress that cost a fortune and could only be worn once. Then there were the morning dresses, the walking dresses, the supper dresses. She introduced a new color to the court. It was a brownish-purple shade. When she presented it to the king, Louis XVI looked at the fabric and chuckled. He said it looked like the color of a flea. In French, a flea is a puce. Instead of being insulted, the court embraced it. Suddenly, puce was the sensation of the season. Dukes and princes dressed in the color of fleas to please the Queen. It was a testament to her power. A single word from her could change the economy of the textile industry. Her mornings became a ritual of consumption. The book of swatches was brought to her bedside. This was a heavy album containing small samples of fabric from every dress she owned. The Queen would open the book. She would run her fingers over the silk and velvet. She would take a pin and mark the patterns she wanted to wear that day. It seemed innocent, but each pinprick represented a fortune. The rest of Europe watched in awe and horror. Foreign courts actually sent spies to Versailles. These spies were not there to steal military secrets. They were there to sketch the Queen's dresses. They needed to send the designs back to London, Vienna, and Madrid so the other royal women could copy them. Marie Antoinette was the first global influencer, but the bill for this influence was staggering. The Queen was accruing massive debt on clothing alone, a debt that the state could ill afford. But fashion was not enough to silence the whispers. The Queen needed a circle of trust. She needed to feel safe. And she found that safety in a new, controversial friendship. The old nobility of France was boring. They were obsessed with rank and ancient rules. Marie Antoinette wanted fun. She wanted laughter. She found it in the Polignac family. The Duchesse de Polignac was beautiful, calm, and seemingly affectionate. She replaced the sensitive Princess de Lamballe as the queen's favorite. But where Lamballe had been nervous and pious, Polignac was ambitious. The queen handed the keys of her heart to the Polignac circle. She granted them the salon of peace in the palace. This room, meant for quiet reflection, was transformed. It became a high-stakes gambling den. The game of choice was faro. It was a fast, brutal card game where fortunes could be won or lost in seconds. Imagine the scene at 3 in the morning. The curtains are drawn tight to block out the coming dawn. The air is thick with the smoke of 1,000 candles and the haze of tobacco. The table is covered in green velvet. On it, piles of gold coins and ivory chips tower like small cities. The queen sits at the center. Her face is flushed. Her eyes are wide. She is addicted to the thrill. The king had banned gambling. He hated it. But Marie Antoinette was persuasive. She would beg him for just one more game. She would plead that she was bored. And the king, who could deny her nothing, would relent. The losses were astronomical. In a single night, people lost enough money to build a hospital. The queen herself ran up debts that had to be paid quietly by the treasury. But the real cost was political. By retreating into this private world with the Polignacs, Marie Antoinette shut the door on the rest of the court. The old dukes and duchesses, the families who had supported the crown for centuries, were left standing in empty hallways. They were insulted. To be ignored by the queen was a social death sentence. Their hurt turned to hatred. They began to talk. If the queen would not speak to them, they would speak about her. The rumor mill began to grind. They whispered that the queen's friendship with Polignac was unnatural. They called them lesbians. They called the queen Messalina, after the promiscuous Roman empress. They said she was sending French gold to Austria. They said she was a spy. The rumors were fueled by the money flowing to the Polignacs. The friendship came with a price tag. The queen showered the family with titles, pensions, and dowries for their daughters. It seemed that the only way to get ahead in France was to be a friend of the queen. Everyone else was left to rot. Desperate for more distraction, the queen turned to the night. She and her brother-in-law, the Comte d'Artois, began to sneak out to the racetracks. They would race their carriages at breakneck speeds, laughing as the mud splattered their finery. Her own brother, Emperor Joseph II, traveled all the way from Vienna to stop her. He was a serious, stern man. He arrived at Versailles incognito. He watched his sister. He saw the gambling. He saw the spending. He sat her down and lectured her. He told her she was acting like a fool. He told her that she was dancing on the edge of a precipice. Marie Antoinette listened. She cried. She promised to change. But as soon as he left, the music started again, and she returned to the dance. She even had a theater built in the palace. It was a small, perfect jewel box of a stage. There, she did something that horrified the traditionalists. She acted. Queens did not act. Acting was for commoners. It was for loose women. But Marie Antoinette loved it. She dressed up as a shepherdess or a milkmaid. She sang songs about simple country life. The irony was blinding. The woman who spent millions was on stage pretending to be a poor peasant, while real peasants starved outside her gates. Amidst the parties and the plays, the primary duty remained unfulfilled. The king and queen had been married for 7 years, and there was still no heir. The public mockery was constant, but during his visit, Emperor Joseph II had done something more important than lecture the Queen. He had taken the king for a walk. He spoke to Louis XVI, man to man. He discussed the physical problem that was preventing the marriage from being consummated. He convinced the king to undergo a simple surgery to correct his condition. Louis, terrified but dutiful, agreed. The surgery was performed. It was a success. In August 1777, the news broke. The marriage was consummated. The Queen wrote to her mother, "I am in the most essential happiness of my entire life." The party girl began to fade. The mother began to emerge. In December 1778, the Queen went into labor. In the 18th century, a royal birth was not a private medical event. It was a public spectacle. It was believed that the public had a right to see the heir arrive, to ensure no baby was swapped. The scene in the Queen's bedroom was the stuff of nightmares. The moment the labor pains began, the palace was thrown into chaos. Princes, princesses, and courtiers rushed the room. But it wasn't just the nobility. The custom allowed anyone to enter. Chimney sweeps and fishwives climbed onto the furniture to get a better look. The room was packed so tight that the Queen could not breathe. The heat was stifling. The noise was deafening. Marie Antoinette lay on her bed, terrified, surrounded by a wall of staring eyes. She began to faint. The king, showing a rare moment of decisive action, grabbed the heavy window latch. With his immense strength, he tore the window open. The cold winter air rushed in. It revived the Queen. A baby cried. It was a girl, Marie-Therese. The Queen did not care that it was not a boy. She wept with joy. She looked at her daughter and said, "Poor little thing, you are not what was desired, but you shall be no less dear to me. A son would have belonged to the state. You shall belong to me." The arrival of children changed her. The manic energy of the gambling table was replaced by the soft rhythms of the nursery. In 1781, she gave birth to a son, the Dauphin. The succession was safe. France had an heir. She would go on to have 2 more children, Louis, Charles, and little Sophie. With motherhood came a desire for simplicity. The towering poufs disappeared. The heavy brocades were packed away. Marie Antoinette wanted to be comfortable. She spent more and more time at the Petit Trianon. She acted as a governess to her own children, which annoyed the official governesses. She wanted to be a mother, not a distant icon. She adopted a new style of dress. It was a simple white muslin gown, tied with a sash. It was called the gaulle, or the chemise à la reine. It was light, airy, and natural. To the Queen, it was freedom. She decided to have her portrait painted in this new dress. The artist, Vigée Lebrun, captured the Queen looking fresh and youthful. She held a rose. She looked directly at the viewer. When the portrait was displayed, the public did not see simplicity. They saw scandal. To the eyes of the 18th century, the Queen was painted in her underwear. Muslin was the fabric of petticoats. For a Queen of France to be seen in it was an insult to the dignity of the crown. Furthermore, the fabric was imported from England. They accused her of trying to destroy the French silk industry. No matter what she did, she could not win. If she wore silk, she was spending too much. If she wore cotton, she was destroying the economy. Tragedy struck the nursery. Her youngest daughter, Sophie, died in infancy. The Queen was heartbroken. She sat by the empty cradle, weeping. She commissioned a portrait of herself surrounded by her children. It was meant to be propaganda. It was meant to show her as a loving mother, the mother of France. In the painting, the queen looks somber. She sits with her children, but there is an empty cradle draped in black, signifying the lost baby. It is a moving image, but by the time it was finished, it was too late. The people had already decided who she was, just as she found peace in motherhood and attempted to repair her reputation. A scandal in which she played no part would seal her fate. It is known as the diamond necklace affair. It is a story so strange, so complex, that if it were fiction, no one would believe it. It began with a man who was desperate. The Cardinal de Rohan was a wealthy, powerful churchman, but he was miserable. The queen despised him. She refused to speak to him or even acknowledge his presence. He was obsessed with gaining her favor. He would do anything to hear a kind word from her lips. Enter the villain, Jeanne de Valois-Santremy. She was a con artist of the highest order. She was clever, charming, and utterly ruthless. She claimed to be a descendant of ancient kings, but she lived by her wits. She befriended the cardinal. She told him a lie. She told him that she was the queen's secret friend. The cardinal took the bait. Jeanne began to carry messages between the cardinal and the queen, but the messages were fake. Jeanne was writing them herself. She forged the queen's handwriting. She wrote affectionate letters, hinting that the queen wanted to be friends but had to keep it secret. The cardinal was ecstatic. Then Jeanne decided to play for the highest stakes. She told the cardinal that the queen desperately wanted a certain necklace. This was not just any necklace. It was a monstrosity of wealth. It contained 647 diamonds. It weighed nearly as much as a suit of armor. It had been made for the previous king's mistress, Madame du Barry. It was worth a kingdom. The jewelers had tried to sell it to Marie Antoinette years before. She had looked at it and said, "France has more need of ships than of diamonds." She had refused it, but Jeanne told the cardinal that the queen had changed her mind. She said the queen wanted to buy it secretly, using the cardinal as a middleman. The cardinal hesitated. He needed proof. So Jeanne arranged a meeting. It was a moonlit night in the gardens of Versailles. In the Grove of Venus, the shadows were deep. Jeanne hired a prostitute who looked vaguely like the queen. She dressed her in a muslin gown. She put a hood over her face. The cardinal approached the figure in the shadows. He bowed low. The woman handed him a rose and whispered, "You know what this means." Then footsteps were heard. The queen fled. The cardinal was convinced. He had met the queen. She had forgiven him. He went to the jewelers. He secured the necklace on credit, claiming he was acting for the crown. He gave the diamonds to Jeanne, thinking she would take them to Marie Antoinette. Instead, Jeanne took the necklace apart. Her husband took the diamonds to London and sold them one by one. The months passed. The jewelers were waiting for their money. The queen, of course, paid nothing because she knew nothing. Finally, the jewelers wrote directly to the queen. They demanded payment. Marie Antoinette read the letter. She was confused. She had never ordered a necklace. She had never spoken to the cardinal. She showed the letter to the king. They launched an investigation. The house of cards collapsed. On the feast of the Assumption, the Cardinal de Rohan was preparing to say Mass in the royal chapel. He was dressed in his red robes. Suddenly, the king summoned him. In front of the entire court, in the Hall of Mirrors, the cardinal was arrested. He was marched away by the guards. It was a sensation. The queen demanded a public trial. She was innocent. She wanted the world to know the truth. She wanted the cardinal punished for daring to think she would meet him in the bushes at midnight. She wanted Jeanne de Valois exposed. It was a fatal mistake. The trial became a circus. The lawyers for the cardinal argued that he was just a victim of his love for the queen. They painted him as a romantic fool. Jean de Valois told wild stories, accusing the queen of all sorts of vices. The verdict came down. Jean was found guilty. But the cardinal was acquitted. The crowd in Paris cheered. They threw their hats in the air. Marie Antoinette sat in her palace, stunned. Do you understand what the acquittal meant? If the cardinal was innocent of insulting the queen, it meant the court believed it was possible for the queen to behave that way. It meant the people believed she was the kind of woman who would buy secret diamonds while the poor starved. It meant they believed she was capable of using men and discarding them. The truth did not matter. The narrative was set. To the people, she was no longer the queen. She was Madame Deficit. She was the monster who ate gold. The necklace affair broke the last link between the monarch and her people. She was innocent of the crime, but she was guilty in the court of public opinion. The necklace was the turning point. The people had decided who she was, and no amount of truth could change the narrative as the revolution began to brew. The clouds were gathering over Versailles. The thunder was no longer just the sound of fireworks or carriages. It was the sound of marching feet. We often judge historical figures by the headlines of their time. We see the caricature, not the person. I wonder, do you think it is possible to ever truly know the heart of a public figure? Or are they always just a reflection of our own projections? Are we seeing the woman, or are we just seeing the wig? The manic laughter of the gambling halls had faded. The towering wigs, dusted with the flower of a hungry nation, had been dismantled. In the quiet corners of Versailles, the air grew heavy. The Queen of France, once the vibrant center of a dizzying galaxy of fashion and excess, began to retreat. She pulled back from the court that had scrutinized her every breath. She pulled back from the husband she had learned to respect but could not passionately love. She retreated into a fantasy. In 1783, she ordered the construction of a new world. It was not a palace of gold. It was a village of mud and straw. Located on the grounds of the Trianon, it was called the Hameau de la Reine, the Queen's Hamlet. It was a rustic dream brought to life by the finest architects in France. It looked like a simple Norman village that had stood for centuries. The walls were painted to look cracked and weathered. The roofs were thatched with reed and covered in moss to simulate age. But inside, the comfort was royal. It was a fully functioning farm. There was a dairy with marble counters. There was a mill where the wheel turned in a stream fed by artificial pumps. There were real farmers, hired to tend the cows and sheep. But these animals were not like the livestock of the French peasantry. They were scrubbed, clean, they were perfumed. They wore ribbons around their necks. Here, Marie Antoinette played her most controversial role. She and her ladies cast aside the stiff silk of the court. They donned simple white muslin dresses. They wore straw hats tied with ribbons. They pretended to be milkmaids. They would walk to the dairy in the soft morning light, the smell of fresh hay and dew surrounding them. They would skim the cream from the milk into porcelain cups. Legend tells us these cups were made by the Sevres factory, shaped in the perfect form of the queen's own breast. Whether true or myth, the image persists: a queen drinking milk from a porcelain fantasy, while her people drank water from muddy wells. It was a beautiful, peaceful life. The sun filtered through the willow trees, dappling the ground with light and shadow. The only sounds were the lowing of the cows and the laughter of her children. but the contrast was lethal. While the queen played at being a peasant in a village that cost millions to build, real peasants were starving in the streets of Paris. They looked at the hameau not as a retreat, but as an insult. They saw a woman mocking their misery, but the queen was not mocking them. She was hiding. The years had not been kind to her heart. In June 1789, while the political world was exploding with the meeting of the Estates General, a personal tragedy struck. Her eldest son, the Dauphin, Louis Joseph, died. He was a sickly child, plagued by a deteriorating spine. His death devastated her. She was a mother who had lost her firstborn son. She expected the nation to mourn with her, but the nation was too busy shouting about taxes and constitutions. When the delegation from the Third Estate came to Versailles, they did not offer condolences. They offered demands. The queen fell into a deep depression. She withdrew further into the Trianon. The isolation fueled the rumors. The people of Paris, who could not see her grieving, invented stories. They whispered that she was hosting orgies in the gardens. They said she was plotting with Austria to destroy France. There is a famous portrait from this time. It shows the queen sitting in her grotto. She is not wearing diamonds. She is wearing a simple dark dress. She looks away from the painter, staring into the middle distance. Her expression is not one of arrogance. It is one of profound melancholy. She looks like a woman who hears the thunder rolling in the distance and knows she has no shelter. And the storm did break. It arrived not with the sound of cannons, but with the sound of rain and footsteps. It was October 5th, 1789. The autumn rain was cold and relentless. In Paris, the bread shortages had reached a breaking point. The market women of the city, the strong women who gutted fish and hauled crates, took up arms. They grabbed kitchen knives. They grabbed pikes. They grabbed muskets. Thousands of them began to march. They were marching to Versailles. They were coming for bread. Marie Antoinette was at the Trianon. She was sitting in her grotto, perhaps reading, perhaps just watching the gray sky. A page boy came running. He was out of breath. He told her she must return to the palace immediately. The mob was coming. She hurried back. She watched from the windows as the sea of people arrived. They were wet, muddy, and furious. They surrounded the palace. Their torches flickered in the rain. They shouted for the king, but mostly they shouted for the queen. The insults they screamed are too vulgar to repeat. They called for her head. They called for her heart. Night fell. The palace was locked down. The queen went to bed, but she did not sleep. The roar of the crowd outside sounded like a beast prowling the perimeter. At dawn, the beast broke in. A gate was left unguarded. The mob poured into the marble courtyard. They stormed the frantic staircases. They killed the guards who stood in their way. They cut off their heads and raised them on pikes. Image of the Women's March on Versailles. The queen was asleep in her bedchamber. She was awoken by the sound of screaming in the hallway. Her ladies-in-waiting rushed in. "Save yourself, madame," they cried. They bolted the door. Marie Antoinette jumped from her bed. She did not have time to dress. She ran in her nightgown, clutching a shawl. She ran to a secret door in the wallpaper. It led to a narrow, dark passage. She scrambled through the cold stone corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear the axes hacking at the door of the bedroom she had just left. She fled to the king's apartments just minutes before the mob burst into her room and slashed her mattress to ribbons. The royal family was cornered. The Marquis de Lafayette, the hero of the American Revolution, tried to restore order. He told the king and queen they must show themselves. They must face the people. The king stepped onto the balcony. The crowd cheered, somewhat reluctantly. Then the cry went up, "The Queen, the Queen." Marie Antoinette stepped out. She was alone. She held the hands of her children. The crowd screamed, "No children." They wanted a clear shot. She pushed the children back into the room. She stood there, on the balcony of the chamber of the king, completely alone. Below her, thousands of muskets were pointed at her chest. The roar was deafening. She did not flinch. She crossed her hands over her chest and bowed her head. She waited to die. But the shot never came. The crowd was stunned by her courage. They had expected a monster. They saw a woman standing tall in the face of death. A silence fell over the courtyard. Then a single voice cried out, "Vive la reine! Long live the Queen!" It was a moment of surreal grace, but it was fleeting. The demand of the crowd was clear. The king and queen must leave Versailles. They must come to Paris. They must live among their people. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, the carriages were loaded. The journey began. It was a funeral procession for the monarchy. The royal carriage was surrounded by the mob. The heads of the dead guards bobbed on pikes outside the window. The crowd chanted, "We are bringing back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's little boy." They meant the king, the queen, and the dauphin. They believed that having the king in Paris would guarantee bread. It was a slow, 6-hour journey. The rain did not stop. The queen sat straight, holding her son. She looked out the window at the palace of Versailles as it disappeared into the mist. She would never see it again. The golden cage was gone. The iron cage awaited. They were taken to the Tuileries Palace in Paris. It was a dusty, dilapidated place that had not been used by kings for a century. They were prisoners. Guards watched every door. The people of Paris watched the windows. For 2 years, they lived in this twilight. The queen, who had been so flighty, became the spine of the family. The king was depressed and indecisive. Marie Antoinette began to plot. She wrote secret letters in code. She used invisible ink. She wrote to her brother in Austria. She wrote to her friends. And she wrote to Axel von Fersen. Fersen was a Swedish count. He was handsome, dashing, and utterly devoted to the queen. Whether they were lovers in the physical sense is a secret history has kept, but they were certainly lovers in spirit. He organized a plan, a desperate gamble. They would escape. On the night of June 20th, 1791, the plan was set in motion. They dressed in disguises. The king dressed as a valet. The queen dressed as a governess. They slipped out of the Tuileries one by one, but the escape was doomed by hubris. Instead of taking separate, fast carriages, the queen insisted they travel together. They used a massive, custom-built carriage called a berlin. It was huge. It was slow. It was painted green and black. It needed 6 horses to pull it. It was the least inconspicuous vehicle in France. They traveled east, toward the border of the Austrian Netherlands, toward freedom, but they were slow. They stopped for picnics. They treated it like a royal procession, not a flight for their lives. Fate caught up with them in a town called Sentmenhold. The local postmaster, a man named Jean-Baptiste Drout, saw the carriage. He looked at the large man inside. He pulled a gold coin from his pocket. He looked at the profile of the king stamped on the coin. He looked back at the man. It was the same face. Drout rode ahead to the next town, Versailles. He rallied the people. He blocked the bridge with an overturned cart. When the royal carriage arrived at Versailles, it was dark. They were stopped. The bells rang out. The townspeople surrounded them with pitchforks and torches. The king was arrested. They were only a few miles from the border, a few miles from safety. The journey back to Paris was a descent into hell. It took 3 days. The heat was oppressive. Dust coated their throats. But the worst part was the crowd. This time, there was no cheering, there was no chanting, there was only silence. The National Assembly had issued a decree: whoever applauds the king shall be beaten, whoever insults him shall be hanged. So the people stood in terrifying silence. They kept their hats on their heads, a deliberate sign of disrespect. The queen sat in the carriage, her eyes dry and burning. The tension was so extreme that, according to her lady-in-waiting, when she took off her bonnet the next morning, her hair had turned stark white. The blonde curls of the Austrian child were gone. The white hair of the tragic queen remained. The end of the monarchy came swiftly after that. On August 10, 1792, the Tuileries Palace was stormed. The king and queen were forced to flee to the Legislative Assembly for protection. They sat in a small reporter's box for hours, listening as the politicians debated their fate. They listened as the monarchy was abolished. They were transferred to the Temple. It was a medieval fortress in the center of Paris, a dark, grim tower. Here, the family was slowly dismantled. First, the king was taken. He was put on trial, condemned, and executed in January 1793. The queen heard the cannons firing. She knew she was a widow. Then, the cruelest blow: the guards came for her son. The young Louis Charles was torn from her arms. They wanted to re-educate him. They wanted to make him forget he was a prince. Marie Antoinette fought them. She clung to the bedpost. She battled for an hour, screaming, until they threatened to kill her daughter. She let him go. She could hear him crying in the room below for weeks. Finally, in the middle of the night, they came for her. They moved her from the temple to the conciergerie. The conciergerie was known as the antechamber of death. It was a damp, rat-infested prison on the banks of the Seine. Her cell was below ground level. Water dripped down the limestone walls. Her health collapsed. She suffered from frequent hemorrhages. Her eyesight was failing. She was 37 years old, but she looked 60. She was watched constantly. 2 gendarmes stood in her cell, day and night. A screen was all that separated her from them when she dressed or used the bucket. She had one dress left. It was black. She repaired it herself with a needle and thread she hid from the guards. In October 1793, her trial began. It was a show trial. The verdict was decided before she entered the room. They accused her of treason. They accused her of sending money to Austria. They accused her of conspiring against the Republic. She answered with dignity. She was calm. She was intelligent. But the prosecutor, a man named Fouquier-Tinville, wanted to destroy her character. He brought a monstrous accusation. He accused her of incest with her own son. He claimed she had corrupted the 8-year-old boy. The courtroom gasped. The queen remained silent. The prosecutor pressed her. "You have not answered the charge," he sneered. Marie Antoinette stood up. She looked tired, pale, and broken. But in that moment, she found the voice of the Empress's daughter. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the women in the gallery. "If I have not answered," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "it is because nature itself refuses to answer such a charge laid against a mother." She turned to the crowd. "I appeal to all mothers who may be present here." The women in the courtroom, the market women, the revolutionaries, felt a chill. They knew this was a lie. For a moment, there was sympathy, but the machine of the terror could not be stopped by sympathy. At 4 in the morning, on October 16th, the sentence was read: death. She was taken back to her cell. She was exhausted. She asked for pen and paper. She wrote a final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. "I have just been condemned," she wrote, "not to a shameful death, that is for criminals, but to go and join your brother." She wrote of her love for her children. She asked them not to seek revenge. She finished the letter, kissed it, and folded it. It was never delivered. It was found years later in the papers of Robespierre. The sun rose. It was a crisp autumn day. The executioner, Henry Sanson, arrived. He cut her white hair short to clear the neck for the blade. He bound her hands behind her back. The rope was rough and tight. She expected a carriage to take her to the scaffold, as the king had been granted. But there was no carriage. There was only a tumbril, an open cart, a plank of wood on wheels. She had to climb in. She sat on the hard bench, facing backward. The cart jolted through the streets of Paris. The journey took an hour. The crowds were massive. They jeered, they shouted. The famous artist Jacques-Louis David watched from a window. He sketched her as she passed. In the sketch, she sits rigid. Her back is straight. Her lip is curled in defiance. She refuses to look at the mob. She stares ahead at nothing, or perhaps at everything she has lost. They reached the Place de la Revolution. The guillotine stood tall against the blue sky. She climbed the steps. She did not need help. She was weak. She was bleeding, but she was the queen. On the scaffold, she accidentally stepped on the foot of the executioner. She stopped. She looked at him. "Pardon me, sir," she whispered. "I did not do it on purpose." These were her last words, an apology, a reflex of the etiquette she had learned so long ago in Vienna. She was strapped to the plank. The neck brace was locked. She looked down into the wicker basket that would catch her head. The blade fell. As the crowd dispersed and the autumn leaves drifted over the cobbles of Paris, the queen was gone. The noise of the revolution would eventually fade, replaced by the silence of history. But tonight, we do not leave on the scaffold. We retreat back through the veil of time to understand what remained after the storm passed. Rest your mind now as we gently turn the page to the quiet reflection of what came after. The storm has passed. The thunder of the cannon fire and the roar of the great crowds in the Place de la Revolution have finally faded into the distance. The sharp metallic fall of the blade has ceased its terrible rhythm. We are left now in the quiet aftermath. It is a silence that feels heavy and deep, like the air in a library after the book is closed. The violent red of the revolution gives way to the gentle gray of twilight. We have walked the long road of her life, from the golden light of Austria to the marble halls of Versailles, and finally to the cold stone of the concierge. Now we stand at a distance, looking back at the ruins of an era that will never return. It is time to sift through the ashes. It is time to separate the woman from the myth and to trace the faint, lingering echoes she left behind in the world. Let us begin with the words that haunt her memory more than any others. Let them eat cake. It is a phrase that has echoed through the centuries, painted in the minds of millions as the ultimate symbol of her cruelty and her ignorance. We see the image of a foolish queen, draped in silk and diamonds, waving a dismissive hand at the starving peasants of Paris. It is a powerful image. It is a dramatic image, but it is a lie. The truth is far quieter and perhaps more tragic than the legend. The phrase itself, Orchille mangent de la brioche, was not born on the lips of Marie Antoinette. It was written in ink on the pages of a book long before she ever set foot in France. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau penned these words in his Confessions when Marie was just a child, playing in the gardens of Vienna, a world away from the troubles of France. She was barely 10 years old when the book was written. She could not have spoken them to the angry crowds of Paris, for the crowds were not yet angry, and she was not yet their queen. Why then did the world believe it? Why does the world still believe it today? To understand this, we must look not at the woman, but at the machinery that destroyed her. We must imagine the smell of a printing press in late 18th century Paris. Close your eyes and smell the sharp chemical temps of the ink. Smell the dust of cheap, rough paper. Hear the rhythmic clank and thud of the press, stamping out page after page, hour after hour. This was the engine of the revolution. In the dark back alleys of the city, in hidden basements and crowded workshops, writers and printers were churning out what they called the libelles. These were not newspapers as we know them. They were pamphlets. They were vicious, scandalous, and often pornographic attacks designed to tear down the dignity of the monarchy. And the perfect target for their ink was the Austrian woman. She was foreign, she was female, she was visible. She was the perfect vessel for all the anger and frustration of a nation that was hungry and tired. The pamphleteers created a monster. They invented a woman who was voracious, cruel, and completely detached from reality. They distributed these papers in the Palarial, where the wind would rustle the pages as men stood on crates, reading the lies aloud to the gathering crowds. The gossip spread like a contagion. It moved from the printing press to the coffee houses, where the steam of coffee mixed with the smoke of tobacco and the murmur of sedition. It traveled to the market stalls, whispered between merchants as they counted their coins. While this paper monster was being constructed in the streets of Paris, the real woman was often sitting quietly in her rooms, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing in the inkpots of her enemies. The tragedy is that the real Marie Antoinette was not the heartless villain of the pamphlets. She was a woman who, in her own limited way, tried to be kind. She adopted poor children. She stopped her carriage to help the injured. She funded charities, but charity does not sell pamphlets. Scandal sells pamphlets. Anger sells pamphlets. And so the ink destroyed her reputation long before the guillotine touched her neck. It is a sober lesson in the power of words. For centuries, history books repeated the lie. It was easier to print the legend than to dig for the truth. It was only much later, when the dust had settled, and historians like Stefan Zweig and Antonia Fraser began to blow away the cobwebs of propaganda, that the woman emerged from behind the caricature. We can see her now, not as a demon, but as a scapegoat. We can see the tragedy of a reputation that was dismantled, page by page, by men who never knew her. But while her reputation was being debated by historians, her biological legacy faced a much darker and more immediate reality. The story of her children is the shadow that stretches long after the sun has set on the monarchy. When the queen was taken from the Temple prison to meet her fate, she left behind 2 orphans in the care of the revolution. There was the young king, Louis Charles, known to history as Louis XVII, and his older sister, Marie-Thérèse. The fate of the boy is perhaps the most heartbreaking chapter in this long saga. He was just a child, barely 8 years old. He should have been playing with wooden soldiers or running in the gardens. Instead, he was locked in solitary confinement in the tower of the temple. Imagine the silence of that room. The windows were barred and shuttered, letting in only a sliver of gray light. The door was bolted. For months, and then years, the child lived in absolute isolation. The cruelty was not just physical, but psychological. His captors sought to re-educate him, to wash away his royal blood with neglect and abuse. They forced him to drink alcohol. They taught him revolutionary songs. They coerced him into signing documents, accusing his own mother of unspeakable crimes. Documents the poor child could barely understand. He was left in the dark, surrounded by filth, his health slowly eroding. He stopped speaking. The vibrant, blue-eyed boy who had once charmed the courtiers of Versailles became a ghost in his own life. He died in that tower at the age of 10, his body ravaged by tuberculosis and neglect. The doctors who performed the autopsy were moved by the sight of his small, wasted frame. One of them, in a secret act of reverence, removed the child's heart. He smuggled it out of the prison in a handkerchief and kept it in a jar of alcohol. For 2 centuries, that heart traveled a strange and secret journey. It was passed from hand to hand, hidden in libraries, stolen, returned, and forgotten. It was only in the year 2000 that modern science finally caught up with history. DNA testing confirmed that the dried, stony heart really belonged to the son of Marie Antoinette. It was finally laid to rest in the royal crypt at St. Denis, reuniting the son with the parents he had lost in the darkness. His sister Marie-Thérèse faced a different kind of tragedy. She was the survivor. She was the one who had to carry the weight of the memory. She remained in the tower alone for long periods, unaware that her mother and aunt had been executed. She waited for them to return, listening to the footsteps in the corridor, hoping the door would open. It never did. She scraped the words, "Mother, I am so unhappy," into the stone wall of her cell. Finally, in 1795, just days before her 17th birthday, she was released. She was exchanged for French prisoners held by Austria. She left the Temple Tower at night, a silent, traumatized young woman, and stepped into a carriage that would take her away from the only home she had ever known. She would not return to France for 20 years. When she did return, she was no longer the innocent girl of Versailles. She was the Duchess of Angoulême, a woman hardened by grief and bitterness. She had seen the worst of humanity, and she could never forgive the French people for what they had done to her family. She was known to be stern, pious, and joyless. She wore mourning clothes for the rest of her life. Years later, she made a private visit to the ruins of the Petit Trianon. Imagine the scene: the old Duchess, dressed in black, walking slowly through the overgrown gardens where she had once played as a child. She walked past the Temple of Love, now cracked and mossy. She walked past the farmhouse, where the windows were broken and the paint was peeling. She saw the ghosts of her childhood in every shadow. She saw her mother in a white muslin dress, laughing on the lawn. She saw her father reading on a bench. She saw her little brother running after a butterfly. It was all gone. Only the stone remained, cold and silent. She left and never returned. The people were gone, but the stage remained. Versailles itself had to survive its own trial. After the royal family was dragged away in October of 1789, the great palace stood empty. It was a shell, a magnificent golden shell without a pearl inside. But the revolution could not let it simply sit there. The palace represented money, and the new republic needed money, and so the looting began. It was not a chaotic sacking, but a systematic, bureaucratic dismantling of the royal household. In 1793 and 1794, the revolutionary government organized massive auctions. For a full year, the doors of Versailles were thrown open to the highest bidder. Imagine the sound of the auctioneer's hammer echoing in the hall of mirrors. It is a sharp, jarring sound in a room built for soft whispers and violin music. Imagine the crowds of dealers, merchants, and curiosity seekers wandering through the king's bedchamber. They touched the velvet drapes. They sat on the silk chairs. They tapped the porcelain vases. Everything was for sale. 17,000 lots of furniture, art, and tapestries were sold off. The magnificent writing desks, the intricate clocks, the gilded chairs, the heavy curtains, all of it was dispersed to the four winds. Some of it went to the other palaces of Europe. Some of it went to the homes of wealthy British aristocrats. Some of it simply vanished into the attics of Paris. The palace itself was nearly demolished. There were serious proposals to tear it down, stone by stone, and use the materials to build housing for the poor. It was saved only by the idea that it could serve the public as a museum of the arts. But for decades, it was a desolate place. Even Napoleon, who conquered half of Europe, refused to live there. He found it too large, too cold, and perhaps too full of ghosts. He preferred the smaller, more intimate palaces. Versailles remained empty, a sleeping giant on the hill. The gardens, once manicured to the millimeter, began to grow wild. Nature, patient and relentless, began to reclaim the land. Vines crept up the statues of the gods. Weeds pushed through the gravel paths where courtiers had once strolled. The fountains were turned off, their pipes rusting in silence. The water in the Grand Canal turned green and stagnant. The Hameau, the Queen's rustic village, fell into total disrepair. The thatched roofs rotted, and the plaster walls crumbled. It became a romantic ruin, a place of melancholy beauty. It was not until the reign of Louis Philippe in the 19th century that the palace found a new purpose. He dedicated it as a museum of all the glories of France. He began the slow, painful process of restoration. But it was not the Versailles of Marie Antoinette. It was a museum, a place of display cases and velvet ropes. In the 20th and 21st centuries, a new effort began. Curators started a global treasure hunt to find the original furniture. They scoured auction catalogs and private collections, buying back the desk that stood in her boudoir, the chair she sat on to have her hair brushed. Slowly, piece by piece, the puzzle is being put back together. But even today, when you walk through the Hall of Mirrors, there is a feeling of emptiness. The light floods in from the tall windows, reflecting off the glass, but there is no one there to see it. The parquet floors creak under the feet of tourists, but the sound is different from the click of high heels and the rustle of silk. At night, when the tourists are gone and the gates are locked, the palace settles into a profound silence. The moonlight strikes the cold marble, and the shadows lengthen in the corners. It is a beautiful, hollow space, a monument to a dream that ended in fire. Today, the palace stands restored, a frozen dream of the past. But to truly understand her world, we must look closer at the sensory details that made up her daily existence. We must look for the atmosphere that lingers when the facts have faded. And there are some who believe that the atmosphere is more than just a feeling. There are some who believe that the Queen herself never truly left. We come now to one of the most curious and enduring stories in the lore of Versailles. It is a story that blurs the line between history and the supernatural, a story that suggests that intense emotion can leave a scar on time itself. It is known as the Moberly-Jordan incident. The year was 1901. It was a hot, still afternoon in August. Two English academics, Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, were visiting the palace. They were rational, educated women, the daughters of clergymen, not given to flights of fancy. They decided to walk through the gardens to find the petty Trianon. As they walked, they later reported, a strange feeling of depression and heaviness settled over them. The air became oppressive and still. The sounds of the modern world faded away. The birds stopped singing. The wind stopped blowing. It was as if they had walked into a vacuum, a pocket of silence where the normal rules of time did not apply. They described seeing a landscape that did not match the maps of 1901. They saw a bridge that no longer existed. They saw trees that had been cut down a century before. They saw people. They saw two men in green coats and three-cornered hats, who they assumed were gardeners, but who looked at them with strange intensity. They saw a man running, breathless, shouting something they could not quite understand. And then they saw her. Sitting on the grass near the petty Trianon was a woman. She was sketching on a pad of paper. She wore a light summer dress, and a pale hat shaded her face. Moberly described her as having fair hair and a rather pretty face, but her expression was one of deep sadness. She did not look up as the women passed. She seemed lost in her own world, suspended in a moment of quiet contemplation. The two women walked on, the heavy feeling eventually lifting as they returned to the main path and met a modern French wedding party. It was only later, when they compared notes and researched the history of the grounds, that they realized what they had seen. The bridge, the kiosk, the specific layout of the treesol of it, matched the topography of the gardens in 1789, just before the Revolution swept everything away. They became convinced that they had stumbled into a time slip, that they had walked into the memory of the Queen on one of her last days of freedom. Whether we believe their story or not, it speaks to the power of the place. Versailles is not just a building, it is a container of memory. It is a place where the past feels incredibly close, pressing against the thin veil of the present. This fascination with the Queen has never faded. She has become an icon, a symbol that transcends her own life. In the modern world, she is everywhere. She is in movies, in fashion, in art. She represents the ultimate tragedy of the fallen star. We are drawn to her not just because she was a queen, but because she was human. We see ourselves in her struggle, in her desire for privacy, in her love for her children, and in her terrible, unjust end. Her private apartments have been restored with painstaking care. The fabrics have been woven on the same looms used in the 18th century. The colors have been matched to the original scraps found in archives. When you walk into her rooms today, you can almost smell the scent of the flowers. She loved the tuberoses, the jasmine, the violets. You can see the harp standing in the corner, waiting for her fingers to pluck the strings. Her jewelry, smuggled out of France in a wooden chest before her escape attempt, has resurfaced in recent years. At auctions, her pearl pendants and diamond rings sell for millions of dollars. People are desperate to own a piece of her, to hold something that touched her skin. It is a way of touching the past, of connecting with the ghost that still haunts our collective imagination. But perhaps the truest connection is not in the diamonds or the furniture, but in the living world she loved best. In the gardens of the Trianon, the flowers still bloom, the seasons still turn. The old oak trees that shaded her walks are still there, their roots deep in the soil of France. The sheep still graze in the meadows of the Hameau. If you go there on a quiet afternoon, when the sun is low and the shadows are long, you can feel it. There is a shimmering heat haze that blurs the edges of the trees. There is the heavy, sweet scent of old roses, the kind that have bloomed there for 200 years. You might see a sketch pad resting on the grass, or the flash of a velvet ribbon in the bushes. You might feel a presence just around the corner of the hedge, a sense that someone has just left the room, or is just about to arrive. It is a mysterious, ethereal feeling. It is timeless. It is the feeling of a story that has no end, a narrative that circles back on itself forever. She has become the spirit of the place, the genius loci of the Trianon. She is no longer the Queen of France, burdened by politics and protocol. She is simply the woman in the garden, sketching, dreaming, and waiting. The history books are closed now. The debates are silenced. The arguments about deficits and diamond necklaces have lost their urgency. All that remains is the atmosphere. Let us drift deeper into the sensory world she left behind. The facts have been weighed and the history written. The noise of the trial and the roar of the crowd have faded into the absolute silence of the archives. What is left is not the politics, but the feeling of a time and place, a soft echo of silk and stone, the dust motes dancing in a shaft of sunlight, the coolness of a pearl against warm skin, the smell of rain on a slate roof. Let us now simply be there, without judgment, drifting through the sensory memories of a vanished world. Let the years fall away like leaves in autumn. Let the silence wrap around you like a heavy velvet cloak. The story is done. The ghosts are at rest. And in the quiet garden of history, only the peace remains. The story is told. The history books are closed. The dates and the names have faded away, leaving us in a space of pure stillness. Now, there is no need to think. There is no need to remember. There is only the feeling of the moment, the texture of the past, and the gentle, rhythmic breathing of the night. We are going to drift now. We are going to float through the rooms and the gardens, not as students of history, but as ghosts of the atmosphere. We are going to touch the silk, smell the powder, and listen to the silence. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let the heavy curtain of the present world fall away, revealing the soft, candlelit world of the sensory court. We begin our journey in the most intimate of spaces. We are in the private dressing room, the cabinet de toilette. The room is small, warm, and enclosed, like a jewelry box lined with satin. The air here is thick and still, held in place by heavy tapestries that cover the walls, muffling the sounds of the outside world. There is a fire burning low in the marble hearth. The logs have turned to glowing embers, pulsing with a deep orange heat that radiates across the floor. In the center of the room stands the dressing table. It is draped in white muslin and lace, a cloud of fabric that hides the wood beneath. On top of this table sits a landscape of silver, crystal, and porcelain. These are the tools of the ritual. Let us look at them closely. Let us move slowly across the surface. There is a silver jar, its surface polished to a mirror shine. It reflects the dancing light of the fire. Inside, there is the powder. Powder à la Mariquelle. It is a fine, pale dust, scented with the memories of a garden. Lean in closer. Can you smell it? It is a complex, layered scent. There is the dusty, rooty smell of iris. There is the sweet, heady perfume of orange blossom. There is the faint, dry scent of cloves and coriander. It is a smell that is both clean and spicy, old and comforting. Next to the jar lies the puff. It is made of swansdown, the softest material on earth. Imagine running your thumb over it. It is so soft it barely feels like matter at all. It is like touching a cloud. When it is dipped into the powder, it picks up the fine grains, holding them in its fibers. When it touches the skin, it releases a small, scented cloud, a mist of white that settles silently in the air, dancing in the beams of light before coming to rest. There is the nécessaire, the traveling vanity case. It is open, revealing its treasures. There are rows of crystal bottles with silver stoppers. The crystal is cold and smooth. It is cut into facets that catch the candlelight, breaking it into tiny rainbows of blue and gold. One bottle holds rose water, another holds almond oil, another holds a heavy amber perfume. The stoppers make a tiny, glass-like clink when they are lifted, a sound that is sharp and clear in the quiet room. We see the small pot of blanc de cirrus. It is a white paste, thick and creamy. We do not think of its chemistry now, only its texture. It is smooth, like heavy cream. It glides over the skin, creating a surface as pale and flawless as porcelain. It covers the imperfections, the redness, the worry. It creates a mask of calm. And there are the patches, small shapes of black velvet and taffeta, a star, a moon, a circle. They are kept in a tiny box made of gold and enamel. The velvet is rougher than the silk, a small point of texture against the smoothness of the paint. They are placed with precision, a secret language of beauty that only the mirror understands. The queen wears her peignoir, a dressing gown of sheer lawn and lace. The lace is from Alencon. It is a web of threads so fine they look like they were spun by a spider. The pattern is of tiny flowers and leaves, interconnected by a mesh of hexagonal loops. It feels weightless on the shoulders. It rustles softly with every breath, a sound like dry leaves whispering in the wind. She sits on a chair, cushioned with velvet. Her feet are resting on a footstool. She wears stockings of silk, knitted so finely that they shine in the light. The silk is warm from the heat of the fire. It hugs the skin, a second layer of softness. The mirror on the table is framed in silver. The metal is cool and dark at the edges, bright and warm where the candle catches it. The glass is deep. It does not just reflect the face. It seems to hold the room inside it. The reflection is softer than a modern mirror, slightly gray, slightly dreamy. It smooths the edges of reality. The only sound is the fire shifting in the grate. A log settles with a soft thud. A spark flies up the chimney. The silence returns, heavier than before. It is a silence that smells of lavender sachets tucked into the wardrobe, of melting wax, of dried flowers. It is a hypnotic, powdery silence. You are safe here. You are warm, clean, powdered, and scented. We drift now. We leave the warmth of the dressing room. We pass through the heavy wooden doors, which turn on their hinges with a low, well-oiled groan. We step out into the grand, silent expanse of the palace. We are entering the Hall of Mirrors, but it is not the hall of the daytime. There are no crowds of tourists. There are no courtiers in red heels. There is no noise. It is night, and the gallery is asleep. The room is vast. It stretches away from us into the darkness, a tunnel of glass and stone. To our left, there are 17 great arched windows. To our right, there are 17 great arched mirrors, 357 individual panes of glass. The candles in the chandeliers have been extinguished hours ago. The air still holds the faint, acrid scent of the snuffed wicks, a smell of smoke and beeswax that hangs near the ceiling. But the room is not dark. It is filled with a ghostly silver light. The moon is full tonight. It hangs high above the gardens, a perfect circle of white. Its light pours through the tall windows, flooding the parquet floor. It creates pools of illumination on the wood, bright and cool. The floorboards are polished wax. They gleam in the moonlight, looking like the surface of a dark lake. Let us walk down the center of the hall. Our footsteps make no sound, for we are drifting. But if we were walking, the sound would be a lonely, hollow click, echoing off the hard surfaces, bouncing back and forth between the glass walls until it faded into nothing. Look at the mirrors. In the daylight, they reflect the sun and the gold of the ceiling. But at night, they reflect the night. They catch the moonlight and amplify it. They reflect the shadows of the trees outside. They reflect the emptiness of the room. It creates a feeling of infinite space. It feels as though we are walking on a bridge of light, suspended between two worlds. Above us, the ceiling painted by Lebrun is lost in shadow. We can just make out the shapes of clouds and chariots, dark figures swirling in the gloom. They look down on us silently. The crystal chandeliers hang like frozen waterfalls. Thousands of drops of glass, cut into teardrops and diamonds, hanging motionless on their golden chains. Occasionally, a draft from a window might make them sway, just a fraction of an inch, causing a tiny shimmer of light to travel across the walls. We pass the statues, figures of silver and gold standing in niches, Roman emperors and Greek gods. Their metal faces are cold and impassive. They watch the moonlight move across the floor. They have stood here for 100 years. They will stand here for 100 more. They are the guardians of the silence. We reach the middle of the hall and turn to look out the window. The glass is cold against our forehead. Outside, the world is a symphony of blue and gray. We see the Grande Perspective, the Latona Fountain, the Royal Walk, the Grand Canal stretching to the horizon, a ribbon of silver water cutting through the black velvet of the forest. The geometry is perfect. Even in the chaos of nature, the lines are straight, the hedges are trimmed, the order is absolute. But the order feels different at night. It feels peaceful. The pressure of perfection is gone, replaced by the simple beauty of shapes in the dark. The shadows stretch long across the gravel. The statues in the garden look like white ghosts standing on the lawns. The feeling is one of immense solitude. There is no one else here, just you and the moon and the mirrors. The moonlight guides us to the window, where the scent of damp earth and flowers invites us deeper. The glass opens. We step over the threshold. The air changes instantly. The smell of wax and polish is gone, replaced by the smell of the night. We are walking towards the Triana now. We are entering the secret garden. The gravel crunches softly under our feet, a rhythmic, grounding sound. Crunch, crunch. We leave the straight lines of the formal palace behind. We are entering the winding, natural paths of the Queen's private world. The air here is humid and rich. It smells of soil that has been warmed by the sun all day and is now cooling down. It smells of green leaves and wet grass. We approach the Temple of Love. It is a circle of white marble columns, glowing softly in the dark. In the center stands the statue of Cupid, carving his bow from the club of Hercules. The marble looks soft in this light, almost like skin. We walk past it towards the lake. The water is still. It reflects the stars above, tiny pinpricks of light dancing on the black surface. At the edge of the water, the reeds rustle. It is the wind moving through the tall grass. A frog croaks, a deep, resonant sound. Then a splash as something slips into the water. Ripples spread out, disturbing the reflection of the stars, then slowly fade away. We walk towards the grotto. It is a man-made cave, built to look wild and ancient. Inside, it is dark and cool. A small stream trickles over the rocks. Plink, plink, plink. The sound of falling water is the most relaxing sound in the world. It is a constant, gentle rhythm that never changes. Moss covers the stones, thick and soft, like green velvet. It smells of damp stone and ferns. We continue to the flower gardens. The queen loved flowers above all else. Even in the dark, we can tell they are there by their scent. The heavy, sweet perfume of jasmine hangs in the air like a curtain. It is intoxicating. It fills the lungs and slows the heart. There are tuberoses, creamy and rich. There are violets, hiding low in the grass, releasing a shy, powdery scent, and the roses. Thousands of roses. The Gallica roses, the damask roses, the scent of... They have folded their petals for the night, sleeping on their stems. But their scent is still there, a lingering memory of the summer day. It is the smell of pure beauty. We walk to the Hamo, the rustic village. The farm animals are asleep in their barns. We can hear the soft breathing of the sheep. We can hear the rustle of straw as a cow shifts its weight. The smell here is earthy and honest, hay and milk and wood. The thatched roofs of the cottages loom dark against the sky. Vines creep up the walls, their leaves whispering against the plaster. We cross a small wooden bridge. The wood is old and weathered, rough to the touch. The stream flows underneath, gurgling over pebbles. It is a happy, busy sound. The water is going somewhere, always moving, always flowing, washing away the cares of the day. We find a bench under a weeping willow tree. The long, trailing branches hang down like a curtain, creating a private tent. We sit. The ground beneath us is solid. The tree above us is protective. The nature surrounds us, grounding us, holding us in its green embrace. We are ready now. We are ready for the final comfort. We leave the garden and drift back, not to the palace, but to the bedchamber. We are going to explore the fabric of dreams. The world of the court was a world of textiles. Everything was covered, draped, and softened by fabric. Let us feel them. We begin with the silk from lion. It is cool to the touch. Run your hand over a length of silk satin. It is so smooth your fingers glide across it without resistance. It has a liquid quality. It pours over the skin. It catches the light and holds it, glowing from within. Then there is the brocade. This is silk that has been embroidered with gold and silver thread. Feel the texture. The silk is smooth, but the metal threads are slightly raised, slightly rough. They form patterns of vines, birds, and flowers. It is a landscape for the fingertips. The metal warms up under your touch. It feels heavy, substantial, expensive. We move to the velvet. This is the fabric of the night. It is deep and dense. When you press your hand into a velvet cushion, it leaves an impression. The pile is soft, like the fur of an animal. It absorbs the light. It absorbs the sound. It is a fabric of silence and shadow. Dark blue velvet, crimson velvet, emerald green velvet. It feels like safety. And the lace, Chantilly lace. It is black and delicate. It is made of thousands of tiny knots. It feels fragile, like a dried leaf. It is a texture of air and thread mixed together. We approach the bed. It is a four-poster bed, hung with heavy curtains of toile de Jouy. The fabric is printed with pastoral scenes in blue and white. The curtains are drawn, creating a small room within a room. The sheets are made of linen, fine, white linen. They are cool and crisp. They smell of lavender and soap. They rustle as you pull them back. You slide in. The mattress is thick, filled with feathers. You sink down, down, down. The feathers shape themselves around your body, holding you, supporting you. There is a quilt made of eiderdown. It is light as air, but incredibly warm. It settles over you like a warm breath. You are surrounded by softness. The silk pillow is cool against your cheek. The velvet curtains block out the world. The linen sheets swaddle you. The colors of the room are soft in the darkness. Pale pink like the inside of a shell. Baby blue like the morning sky. Celadon green like dried sage. These are the colors of peace. They are not bright. They do not demand attention. They exist only to soothe the eye. The warmth of the bed begins to seep into your bones. The tension leaves your muscles. The softness of the fabric is the only reality. The cool silk, the warm wool, the soft feathers. The candles have burned low, casting long, soft shadows across the room. The flame flickers once, twice, and then goes out, leaving a thin trail of gray smoke that curls up into the darkness. The silk has settled. The gardens are quiet. The fountains have stopped. The echoes of the court have finally drifted into absolute silence. You are safe here. You are in the comfort of the present, visited only by the gentle, beautiful dreams of the past. The history is done. The work is done. There is nothing left to do but drift. Thank you for walking through history with me tonight. Thank you for listening to the echoes. If you are still awake, let your eyes close. Let your breathing slow. In, out, in, out. Let the quiet darkness carry you away. Good night.